Conquest of the Planet of the Apes is the grimmest entry in a franchise best known for rubber masks and Charlton Heston shouting at scenery. Let's dive into 20 of the strangest, scrappiest, and most bananas facts about Conquest of the Planet of the Apes. Number 1. The original script's gruesome evolution cut. In Paul Dane's early draft, the apes' backstory was way darker and more detailed than what ended up on screen. He actually wrote scenes that traced their shift from pampered pets to an oppressed labor force, with pretty grim touches, mutations, medical tinkering, and sudden leaps in intelligence. Basically, it leaned harder into the humans messing things up theme. But the studio took one look and decided, nope, too intense. They worried audiences might not be ready for a monkey makeover montage that looked like something out of a horror lab. It's kind of ironic. They wanted a movie about evolution, but only the family-friendly version. The darker material got axed, and we got a safer story. If only evolution worked on Hollywood decisions, then maybe we'd evolve past endless, half-baked sequels. Number 2. A bloody opening scene axed for being too real. Originally, the film was supposed to start on a much harsher note. Police chasing down and killing a runaway ape. The scene would have shown his body covered in scars, the kind you'd expect from years of abuse and forced labor. Pretty heavy stuff, especially for a movie hitting theaters in 1972, when audiences were still adjusting to the idea that science fiction could be political and not just men in rubber suits. The studio figured it was too much, too soon. Better to ease viewers into the uprising instead of hitting them with a dead, mutilated ape in the first 5 minutes. But here's the swing. Cutting it kind of dulled the message. If they'd kept it, people might have stopped siding with the humans real quick. Number 3. Filmed on a futuristic college campus. Instead of building expensive sets, the filmmakers took a clever shortcut. They filmed most of the outdoor scenes at the University of California, Irvine. At the time, the campus was practically brand new, opened in 1965, and designed by architect William L. Pereira, who had a knack for futuristic, minimalist buildings that looked more like control centers than dorm hangouts. The sleek concrete structures, wide plazas, and unfinished feel gave off exactly the kind of sterile, authoritarian vibe the movie needed to sell its dystopian 1991 setting. Honestly, it was cheaper than trying to create a whole city from scratch, and it worked so well that some viewers thought the sets were purpose-built. Imagine being a student there late for class and walking past cameras filming your campus as a stand-in for an ape dictatorship. Talk about tuition paying for trauma. Number 4. Shooting amid construction chaos. When the crew set up at UC Irvine, the social science complex wasn't even finished yet, which turned out to be both a headache and a happy accident. Half-built walls, scattered debris, and the constant presence of cranes gave the Ape Rebellion scenes a raw, unsettled look you couldn't buy on a Hollywood backlot. Instead of spending money dressing the set, the filmmakers basically got a ready-made dystopian backdrop, concrete dust included. Of course, it wasn't all smooth sailing. The cast and crew had to dodge workers, noise, and the occasional risk of something heavy crashing down mid-scene. But in a way, the chaos made the uprising feel more believable. If a steel beam had flattened an actor, the director probably could have shrugged and called it authentic performance art. After all, accidents are just evolution speeding things up. Number 5. Camera magic made a tiny set look epic. One of the biggest challenges of Conquest of the Planet of the Apes was making a very modest budget look like the end of civilization. Director J. Lee Thompson leaned heavily on camera tricks, tight framing, and fast cuts to give the impression that a handful of futuristic-looking buildings at UC Irvine were actually a massive city under siege. In reality, the city was just a few spots shot from multiple angles, recycled again and again with different groups of extras in ape costumes. Add in some smoke, chaos, and careful editing, and suddenly the limited space looked like a full-scale uprising. It was classic Hollywood sleight of hand, convincing the audience they were seeing something much larger than what was actually there. Number 6. Backlot shenanigans in Century City. Not all of Conquest of the Planet of the Apes was filmed on UC Irvine's campus. For interiors and some exterior shots, the crew moved to the Fox backlot in Century City, Los Angeles. At the time, Century City itself was a pretty new development, built on what used to be the 20th Century Fox backlot land that the studio sold off in the 1960s. Its sleek, mall-like plazas and walkways fit perfectly with the film's vision of an unnamed future city. During shooting, actors in full ape prosthetics and riot gear would occasionally wander near the real shops and restaurants, startling actual shoppers who hadn't signed up for dystopian performance art. Imagine biting into your pretzel only to be shoved aside by a guerrilla revolutionary. "Excuse me, citizen, your species is being discontinued. Would you like that extinction supersized?" Number 7. The cheapest ape flick in the franchise. Of all the Planet of the Apes films, Conquest was made on the tightest budget, just $1.7 million, which was small even by early 70s standards. To put that in perspective, the original Apes from 1968 cost about twice as much, and even that film had to cut corners. By the time Conquest rolled around, Fox was struggling financially, so the crew had to get creative. Sets were reused, extras were recycled, and camera tricks did the heavy lifting to make a few dozen actors in costumes look like a citywide rebellion. And yet, somehow, the film still managed to feel urgent and packed with action, while sneaking in sharp commentary on slavery and revolution. With that kind of money, they might have been tempted to rent a few real chimps, though actors in latex were cheaper, easier to direct, and didn't demand hazard pay and bananas. Number 8. A blatant civil rights allegory. Unlike some of the earlier Apes films, Conquest of the Planet of the Apes didn't try to hide its politics. Screenwriter Paul Den openly modeled the story on the civil rights movement, using the apes as stand-ins for Black Americans facing systemic oppression in the U.S. at the time. Scenes of whippings, police brutality, and violent uprisings weren't just sci-fi drama. They directly echoed the protests and clashes that were filling American newsreels in the late 60s and early 70s. For Black audiences especially, the parallels weren't subtle, and the film struck a nerve as both allegory and reflection. Meanwhile, some white viewers shrugged it off as just a fantasy, proving that denial works across species. Humans on screen probably thought to themselves, "That could never happen here," while history quietly polished its chains and whispered, "Wanna bet?" Number 9. The English writer who nailed American issues. Paul Dane wasn't American. He was a London-born writer with a background in poetry, intelligence work during World War II, and later a knack for screenwriting. And yet, when he took on the script, he managed to thread in pointed observations about American racism, oppression, and the cultural unease of the late 60s and early 70s with remarkable precision. It's almost funny, in a bleak way, that an Englishman who grew up far from Alabama lunch counters or Los Angeles protests could sometimes express those struggles more clearly than the people living them day to day. Maybe it takes an outsider to strip away the national myths and see what's really going on. Then again, it's a bit like needing someone across the ocean to tell you your house is on fire. Slightly embarrassing, but at least he brought a sharp pen to the smoke. Number 10. Huge hit with Black audiences. The movie struck a chord in ways that went beyond flashy costumes or cool sci-fi effects. Its themes of rebellion, oppression, and uprising resonated strongly with Black audiences, who saw reflections of real-world struggles in the story of apes overthrowing their oppressors. At the box office, it did surprisingly well, punching above its budget and expectations, proving that socially conscious entertainment could still be a crowd pleaser. Beyond ticket sales, it sparked conversations about race, power, and justice, even if some of those chats happened while people were trying not to spill their popcorn. And the darkly funny part? White audiences occasionally squirmed in their seats as the allegory hit too close to home, while others cheered like the underdog or underape was finally getting the last laugh. Sci-fi, apparently, has a way of holding up an uncomfortable mirror to society. If you're absolutely devouring this deep dive into the wild world of ape cinema, do me a huge favor. Hit that subscribe button and absolutely wreck the algorithm for me. Seriously, it helps more than you know. Thank you, and we love you all so much. Number 11. The ending they tried to tame. American audiences mostly saw the tamer, PG-friendly ending, where justice felt neat and the revolution somehow more digestible. But overseas viewers, especially in Japan, got the version Paul Dane originally imagined, much darker and unapologetic. In that cut, Governor Breck is dragged off by guerrillas, presumably to his doom, while Caesar simply turns his back, a silent witness to the brutal cycle of revolt. It's grim, cyclical, and far more in line with the film's underlying commentary on power and vengeance. That uncut version even had a brief screening in San Francisco in 1973, immediately sparking cult legend status among collectors. Today, archival hunters and hardcore fans will pay four-figure sums just for a 35mm canister of it, a tangible piece of cinema's darker heart. Essentially, it's the ending that whispers, "Revolutions aren't tidy, and neither is this movie." Number 12. The $30,000 tank that wasn't. J. Lee Thompson, the director, had big dreams, a real tank rolling through ape-controlled streets, but reality hit harder than any guerrilla. Renting a full-scale tank in 1972 would have cost $30,000 a day, which is roughly the equivalent of a small moon mission today. So the art department worked some classic movie magic. They slapped together a plywood shell and mounted it on a golf cart. Voila, the tank was born. On screen, it lumbered along at a majestic 4 miles per hour, making a grand total of 1 appearance, and apparently even blew a tire on take 3. It's the kind of low-budget ingenuity that makes filmmaking feel equal parts genius and slapstick, showing that sometimes imagination and a few spare boards can do more than a small army of real tanks ever could. Number 13. Governor Breck's Tech Bro Mussolini. Look, if there's one thing that sticks out about Governor Breck, it's how effortlessly sleek and terrifying he looks. Don Murray, who played him, had a very particular idea in mind. Breck should radiate the kind of cold, calculating authoritarianism you might expect from a tech bro Mussolini. To sell it, Murray even rehearsed his lines in German to nail the cadence and severity, which is dedication bordering on obsessive. The costume designer, working on a shoestring budget that probably couldn't afford a decent blazer, went along with it, and the black turtleneck became the perfect symbol of corporate meets fascist villainy. It's minimalist, it's chilling, and it's a subtle reminder that sometimes all you need to look like you're running a dystopia is a really tight sweater and the right attitude. Number 14. The Corringtons and the Almost Tragic Wife. John William Corrington and Joyce Hooper Corrington were brought in to take some of the edge off the script, which, at that point, was leaning toward full-blown misery. One of their biggest changes involved cutting a subplot so grim it would make most revenge movies blush: Caesar's wife, Lisa, being executed by humans. In the original draft, this tragedy would have added a gut punch of motivation for Caesar's uprising, but the studio, understandably nervous about leaving audiences in tears, demanded a lighter touch. The subplot didn't vanish entirely. A prop newspaper preserves the story in maybe 3 frames if you know exactly where to pause your Blu-ray. It's a tiny ghost of what could have been, a reminder that the film might have been a much darker, bleaker meditation on loss, and that the Corringtons were basically hired to sprinkle in a little emotional sunscreen. Number 15. The time-traveling riot helmets. If you notice the slightly clunky, futuristic helmets on the human security forces, there's a good reason they weren't exactly made for Conquest. Instead, they were hand-me-downs from the 1960s sci-fi TV series The Time Tunnel. That's right, Hollywood thrift at its finest. If you've got a sharp eye and a willingness to pause your Blu-ray obsessively, you might even catch the faded serial numbers or markings from their previous TV life. It's a charming little reminder that low-budget filmmaking often relies on imagination as much as money. Number 16. The exploding ammo boxes. Fox refused to pay for squibs, those little explosive charges that make bullets look like they're hitting people, so the filmmakers had to get creative. Enter the resourceful ape actors who threw empty ammo boxes, spray-painted black, at the human soldiers. On camera, it looks like chaos and violence breaking out everywhere, but in reality, it was just a lot of flailing boxes and a few panicked production assistants ducking for cover. The actual sound of bullets ricocheting and impacts, all added later in post-production by the sound designers, who basically turned cardboard into carnage. It's the perfect example of shoestring budget, maximum cinematic impact, and a little reminder that movie magic often involves more imagination than money. Chances are, unless you were looking for it, you never even realized the explosions were completely faked. Number 17. PG, but somehow bloodier than you'd think. When the MPAA first saw Conquest, they slapped it with an R rating for sustained revolutionary violence, which honestly isn't shocking given the original cut. The film was raw, visceral, and unapologetic. Apes getting brutalized, then striking back with equal ferocity. For Fox, hoping to sell tickets to as many eyeballs as possible, an R was a serious problem, so the studio went into full re-edit mode. They trimmed scenes, looped in a mercy speech, and softened the more graphic moments just enough to squeak by with a PG, and yet somehow, it still might be the bloodiest PG movie of 1972. Audiences today can only imagine what that R-rated version looked like, probably enough to make your average 1970s parent clutch their pearls while wondering why the talking apes suddenly seem so angry. Number 18. The flipped fate of Governor Breck. When the studio decided Governor Breck couldn't be shown meeting a grisly end, editor Marjorie Fowler got inventive. Rather than depicting his execution, she found a way to imply that his fate was ambiguous, or at least leave audiences guessing. Her solution? She flipped a cutaway shot of Breck's surviving scene left to right, literally reversing the film negative. If you freeze frame at just the right moment, you might catch the tiny giveaway. Only the most eagle-eyed viewers or fellow editors would ever notice, which makes it a perfect little Easter egg. In other words, Marjorie Fowler turned a studio restriction into a subtle piece of cinematic mischief. Number 19. The Gorilla Who Swore. During one of the ape uprisings, a background gorilla extra got a little carried away and improvised a line that definitely wasn't in the script. "Lousy human bastards." The moment was pure unscripted fury, a tiny spark of authentic rage captured on film. The ADR team, tasked with cleaning up the soundtrack, tried to play it safe and bleeped out the expletive, turning it into the more polite-sounding "lousy human." But if you watch closely on a crisp 4K transfer, the lip movements make the original insult perfectly clear. "Lousy human bastards!" It's a little accidental Easter egg, a glimpse of the extra's commitment, and honestly, it's hilarious. A reminder that sometimes the chaos behind the scenes sneaks its way into the final cut, adding unexpected realism and a dash of dark humor to the revolt. Number 20. The uprising that inspired Wakanda. Conquest of the Planet of the Apes didn't just make its mark in sci-fi, it left a legacy that echoes even in modern superhero cinema. Joe Robert Cole, co-writer of Black Panther, has openly credited Conquest as the blueprint for Wakanda's uprising sequence. While at USC Film School, he reportedly studied the choreography of the rebellion and the ebb and flow of chaos, frame by frame, soaking up every lesson in staging a revolt. It's fascinating to see how a 1972 sci-fi film about apes rising against oppression could inform one of the most iconic, visually stunning revolutionary sequences in contemporary cinema. Basically, if you ever wondered where the cinematic DNA of Wakanda's rebellion came from, you can thank a bunch of vengeful, slightly anarchic apes and the filmmakers who dared to let them bite back. Bonus fact, the original Dane ending location. For those who've stuck with us to the very end, here's a treat. The original mimeograph of Paul Den's bleak, unflinching ending still exists. It's tucked away in the University of Iowa's special collections under the ominous title Censored Cinema, Box 42. This isn't some digital scan. You'd actually have to make an appointment to view the physical pages, which are filled with every shocking detail the studio deemed too intense for 1972 audiences. Imagine holding it in your hands, reading every capitalized "die," every note of vengeance, every bit of chaos that was scrubbed from the theatrical cut. It's cinematic history in its rawest form. Just remember, gloves for preservation, maybe a stress ball for yourself, and perhaps a small, sympathetic chimp, because even decades later, The intensity of those pages is not for the faint of heart. If you enjoyed this dark dive, stop monkeying around and flick a banana at that like button before the apes do it for you. Subscribe for more cinematic skeletons and comment, which fact made you rethink evolution?
Wow, that was weird.